Hello everyone, I'm Wendell Jones and welcome to this edition of the program Jones and Company. On this program we examine national issues and we've been doing Jones and Company for almost 20 years. This coming September will make 20 years that we have been doing Jones and Company, and we have not repeated a guest in every program or every week. And so it is our pleasure to have a repeated guest on the program who has been here on several occasions, and he is quite prolific in our country. He has been churning out a whole lot of press releases on political matters in the Bahamas, and quite a talented politician. I'm talking about the chairman of the Free National Movement, Mr. Darron. Mr. Cash has served as a senator before, and he's an accountant by profession, and it's always good to have him on our program. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. It is a pleasure to be with you, and in the company of a great Bahamian, Mr. Enius.
Yes, thank you so very much, Godfrey Enius.
Thank you, sir.
I hope you enjoyed another vacation. He takes about half a dozen vacations a year, you know.
He's taking all the vacations that our Prime Minister should take.
Please, okay, let's be kind now.
He always teases me.
Yes.
He always teases me.
Yes, but you know, he does well when he goes on vacation, because he would always bring a gift for me, because I cannot go, you see.
Excellent, good man. Someone's got to keep working. Someone's got to keep working.
Yeah. Mr. Cash, the political firmament is getting a little hotter, it seems. The leader of the Free National Movement has called for the resignation of one parliamentarian, and you've been commenting on many issues in the country. When you look at what is happening on the political landscape of the Bahamas, how do you describe it, the political landscape?
I think it is best described as problematic, disappointing. It is a government that is underperforming, and the reality is that the story of Renwood Wells is really secondary to the broader issues of governance that exist in the country. But even in his experience, it is a manifestation or a representation of the poor way in which the country is being governed. The subtext in Prime Minister Christie's administration is dysfunction, that it does not appear as though Perry Christie is running a well-coordinated government that is really focused on getting important things done. And in many respects, the evidence has been mounting that this is a government of ministers who are all doing their own things. And so Renwood Wells' experience of signing off on over $500 million letter of intent is just another example of a free-for-all that's happening in government. And so, again, the subtext is dysfunction within this government, lack of coordination, and as I've said before, really a government that lacks adult supervision.
That is a narrative on the negative side. What is the government doing well? Anything?
Yeah, I think the positive thing for the country is that to some degree the government is at least identifying the kinds of issues that have to be addressed. The unfortunate thing about it, and we learn this in business, it is not so much who has the idea that's important, it is your effectiveness in implementing the idea. And so just as an example, we have Mr. Enius in our company. The idea of focusing on family island development is a good idea. The issue that undermines that is the extent to which in the Prime Minister's focus on BAMSI, the agricultural project in North Andros, the question is the extent to which it is a project that is too much focused on special interest contracts where they are making mistakes in the hiring of the person who is brought in from the outside to serve as a technical advisor. To the extent that they are focusing on tax reform, it is too little, too late, not enough. the idea is that this country really needs comprehensive tax reform. And the government attempt at implementing value-added tax, which is just one component of what is needed, is undermined by the fact that they have done such a really substandard job in the introduction even of that tax, that they have not been successful in really making the case for the extent to which the overall system of taxation needs to be reformed. And then on the question of the country's energy policy, where the lack of coordination is again manifested in Renwood Wells and what he has done, to the extent that the Prime Minister more than a year and a half ago introduced the idea of energy reform and said that by the end of 2013, I believe it was, they wanted to sign a contract to have a new partner with BEC. Well, what you have had was no agreement signed for partial or full privatization of BEC. At the same time, you have the Deputy Prime Minister's office engaged in outsourcing elements of the public dump, leaving people without work to do, and question of whether the project had been carefully thought through. At the same time, you have Mr. Wells engaging in signing a letter of interest with another company, which again suggests that there is a lack of coordination of policy. And so, again, I emphasize that for all of the things that ordinarily you would give the government a lot of credit for putting on the agenda, they're doing such a really dismal job in executing. And that's where the great degree of concern exists.
Okay, Godfrey?
Mr. Cash, let me make 2 points here. The first, you mentioned about the consultant to the institute. I don't want to dwell on that. I just want to make this point. The consultant to the institute, and I've shown Mr. Jones references from the Minister of the sitting Minister of Agriculture in Jamaica and the past Minister of Agriculture recommending him. All right? Now, I don't care what you hear from people who in many ways don't know what they're talking about, do not understand agriculture, right? I am telling you what the facts are, and he's seen the letters. All right? That's that point. The other point I want to make is, what would you have done if you were in the PLP who inherited an economy left by the FNL?
Well, that's an easy question. I would have carried on.
You would have carried
on. Because there is no question that the Free National Movement government left Prime Minister Christie an economy on the rebound. The Free National Movement left in place a series of programs that were designed to maintain meaningful levels of employment within the country at a time when the private sector was not working. That whether you're talking the New Providence Road Improvement Program, whether you're talking programs within to shore up the strength of the Bahamas Electricity Corporation, at the same time you're keeping people's lights on. I would have kept those going. And then you're talking about the intent to privatize the Bahamas Telecommunications Company and at the same time keep in place a framework to hold them accountable for delivering the quality of services that they are committed to.
Let me cut you off here. That is your point of view, right? Obviously, that point of view doesn't square with the agencies that evaluate countries like Moody's and others, right?
Oh, really?
No, it doesn't, because the Bahamas was on the verge of being downgraded. And unemployment was soaring, right? The deficit was the major item in the budget. Debt servicing. Mr. Cash, the country was in serious economic problems.
I am not, well, of course we were coming out of a great recession, so I'm not sure which international reports you were reading that suggested that the country was headed for a downgrade. Because I think the outlook for the Bahamian economy, as measured by the international agencies, have deteriorated under the Christie administration.
No, I
And
don't
they
agree with you.
they have gotten an improved economic picture that started under the F&M, both on the employment side as well as in terms of the growth of the economy. Yet they have been unable to implement meaningful tax reform
Mr.
to
Cash.
the level that inspired confidence in the international arena, and
Mr. Cash.
therefore the outlook was downgraded.
The fundamental issue facing the Bahamas was that it was living beyond its means.
Okay, well, no one's going to dispute that.
Right? And one of the avenues for bringing the economy back on track was the introduction of a tax regime. And that was one of the single aspects that international agencies were looking for in order not to downgrade the Bahamas, whether a government was about to introduce that or not, right? Now, your government at one point agreed with the value-added tax, while in opposition, is now opposed to it. How do you come to that?
I don't have to account for that, because if you look at what is on record, the reality is the F&M former Minister of State for Finance did make it very clear that that was up for consideration. Up for consideration does not mean implementation. It does not mean doing exactly what Mr. Christie has done to this point, which is impose value-added tax and its double taxation regime on the backs of the Bahamian people. It did not mean imposing value-added tax on Bahamas Electricity Corporation bills at a time when people can hardly keep their lights on right now.
Mr. Cash, is it the position of the Free National Movement that additional taxes are needed in the Bahamas at this time?
Yes.
Okay.
The question is, on whom are we going to impose additional taxes?
Yes.
And I don't want to prevent you from asking the rest of your question, but the reality is that the F&M's position is that there ought to be a holistic approach to doing so. That simply increasing taxes is not enough. That government reining in spending has to be an important part of the consideration as well.
Yes, the government of the Bahamas, most businesses in this country will tell you that the government has indeed reined in spending. As a matter of fact, they have slashed their budgets in various departments. That is clear. Isn't it?
No, it's not clear. As a matter of fact, in this particular budget year that just ended, the expenses didn't reflect a reduction, and in the 2014-2015 budget, they're expected to increase. Meaningful reduction in government spending would have projected significant and perhaps not even significant, at least meaningful reduction in government expenditure, and that's clearly not the case in 2014 and 15.
You don't see that this government is putting in place measures to reduce spending?
No, definitely not to reduce spending.
You don't see that at all?
Definitely not to reduce spending. Just look at the overall numbers. By what percentage are they projecting to reduce government spending, both on the capital and on the recurrent expenditure side?
Many
in
of the ministries are
2014-15?
complaining, not unless I'm not hearing them properly, many of the ministries are complaining that their budgets have been slashed by 5–10% in some cases. The College of the Bahamas has complained that the budget is cut. Yes, the Ministry of Agriculture has complained that the budget is cut.
I'm not sure which budget. I don't remember the precise numbers, but when I looked at the budget for 2013-14 and then projected for 14-15, I don't see any significant reductions. Okay. And in fact, I think the Prime Minister has, in very cute ways, I think the Prime Minister is looking at selling planned reductions in 2015-16 as opposed to 14 and 15.
Okay, let me ask you this. If not that, then what?
If not
that value-added tax.
I don't think the answer, the debate has been about VAT is a bad idea in and of itself.
The leader of the opposition
you
has said that that his government will repeal VAT.
But no, I'm pretty sure that's not what he said. He spoke to the same issue that I raised a moment ago. The question is, on whom are taxes being imposed? Just open the newspaper, and just as an example, the issue is, if the government led by Prime Minister Christie decides that they're going to tax the least of these, then the leader of the opposition was saying, to the extent he is able to do so, he is going to remove the taxes on the least of these and apply them where they should be. Case in point, I look in the newspaper at where the rate of taxations will change on January 1, 2015, and I look at vegetables and things like that, and I see, yes, some small reduction from 10 to 5% as an example. Yet jewelry, gems are free. What kind of policy do you have where, where someone who's deciding on vegetables has to pay tax, but the people who are in the jewelry business get free? That speaks to whether or not the taxes are being applied appropriately. And again, I say it needs to be a holistic discussion or consideration in this respect. To the extent that taxation on vegetables needs to be 5%, why ought it not be 0 and seek to balance the scale by doing more to ensure that the people who do have the ability to pay more, who do have the ability to pay real property taxes, for example, who aren't paying, that you improve the regime in such a way to ensure that they do pay more, so that the burdens that you have to apply even on the average Bahamian is lessened.
The question is, as a principle, does the Free National Movement support VAT as a principle?
As an option for taxation,
yes,
yes, it is something that would be looked at in the same way that you would.
No, I'm not asking you to look at it. As a party in opposition, is it the position of the Free National Movement to support the introduction of value-added tax in the Bahamas?
Not on January 1, 2015. The case has always been made that we're not satisfied that this is the right time to impose additional taxes on Bahamians, particularly value-added tax. However, or that value-added tax is the right tax to apply. And you've heard me, you've heard the Shadow Minister of Finance make the case that the right approach to take before you double down on value-added tax might very well be and should be, let's consider all of the options that were being put forward, whether by the Coalition for Responsible Tax Reform or by others, whether it's value-added tax, sales tax, income tax, or some combination thereof. Let's evaluate all of those on a reasonable, realistic basis.
Haven't they been examined, Mr. Cash, by international experts, the Chamber of Commerce, all of the agencies have looked at all of these things? Haven't they been evaluated?
There has been no, I don't think anyone would make the argument that there has been a fair evaluation of all of these, because every time somebody proposed an alternative, it got shot down by someone within the Ministry of Finance without the Bahamian people having the meaningful basis for evaluating it. But to speak to your point about what the FNM supports, really the answer was, don't rush to impose new taxes, but because we recognize that there is a need to increase government revenues, let opposition and government sit down to consider some meaningful proposals that can be implemented between January 1, 2014 and June 30, 2015, before you decide that you're going to settle on value-added tax that will be with us for the long term.
Okay. Mr. Cash, there's an issue of urgency in this matter. International agencies are looking to see what steps the government is taking on this issue of addressing the way we are living beyond our means. Right. My question to you is, VAT is a consumer tax, right?
Yeah.
You're concerned about the least among us. Then it would seem to me the most equitable taxation is income tax. You tax those who make the most money.
Okay.
Are you opposed to that?
No, and that comes to the point that I was making.
So what you're saying is that the F&M is an agreement for income tax?
No, the point that I'm making is we ought to consider all of the options in a meaningful way without a bunch of half-baked analyses that we would have seen come out of the Ministry of Finance.
Yeah, but Mr.
Without
Cash,
the presentation of the documentation that would enable reasonable people to consider all of the options.
But as Mr. Enos is saying, all of the international agencies are saying to you that this is a matter of urgency. The International Monetary Fund, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, they all say that you need to do something with your deficit now.
Right. Look at
you've been running deficits of $400–500 million a year. Right. If you do not do something, you would have to borrow next year. Right. All right? Right? Every year you'd have to borrow $500 million. Right. So you need to do something now.
Right.
What do we do?
Right. And obviously,
well, the question is, what do we do?
Yeah, and I'm saying obviously the Christie administration's answer to doing something now was to do something 18 months later.
But
their answer was to do something 18 months later, when a more prudent step would have been, let's very early on in this process sit down, opposition and government. Let's agree on a set of imperfect, though immediate options that you would have been able to implement as early as July 1, 2014.
Mr. Cash, you
interim steps.
You are from a party that ran the government of the Bahamas for 5 years before May 2012. Mm-hmm. And what you did in that particular period of time, you increased the national debt by way over $1 billion, okay? You added in excess of $1 billion to the national debt, making it burdensome for the government of the Bahamas and untenable, really. So the Christie administration coming to office had to borrow right away, immediately, to cover a deficit.
Really?
Yes.
That is a convenient rewriting of history, Mr. Jones.
They borrowed $500 million immediately.
You talk about
to cover a deficit that you left in place.
You talk about the F&M putting a burden on the economy, right? What the F&M did was keep the economy afloat. What the F&M did was
by borrowing.
Of course.
Yes.
No one's denying that.
Right.
No one's denying. But the point is, it was money well spent, and the Bahamian people could touch, feel, and see where the money was being spent. But at the same time, it kept people working. It kept people working. It kept the road verges clean.
But unemployment still rose. You still had high unemployment. You sold BTC. You got the money from BTC. No one knows where the money went. No one knows where the $210 million went because the F&M government was spending like a drunken sailor.
Neither Jones and Company nor the Christie government's going to get off the hook that easily. This idea of imposing burden is nothing short of a rewriting of history. The funds that were borrowed were designed to keep the Bahamian economy afloat, and it was kept afloat, and in fact, it was on a trajectory to improvement. And BC is just one of those examples where in the run-up to the general election, there was great hue and cry over the government's assistance programs to keep lights on. And of course, a part of that was the government of the Bahamas using its power to support lending that went to BC. And one of the first things they did, the Christie government did when they came in, was decide that, that program that the F&M had in place to help people to keep their lights on, that's a good idea. Yeah. We'll do the same thing.
Yeah, but Mr. Cash, in every single fiscal year of the Free National Movement government from 2007 to 2012, every fiscal year, you borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars to cover the deficit. Isn't that right?
to invest in the Bahamian economy.
You had to pay off the deficit.
To invest. No, well, deficits were created. They were funded by borrowing.
Yes, good.
Deficits
So you were running deficit budgets.
They were funded by borrowing.
You were running deficit budgets for 5 consecutive years.
At a time when the economy was going off the rails.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
but
what are we debating?
We are debating what do you do to stop the hemorrhaging? What do you do, Mr. Cash, so that we do not run these deficits? And the answer is to put in place additional taxes.
Okay.
You are saying that your party is in disagreement to putting in place VAT as of January 1st, 2015.
On the backs of poor people in an anemic recovery.
What do you do?
Right.
What do you do? The question is, since you are against putting in place VAT in 2015, the first day of 2015, what do you do?
We decide, first of all, that we're not going to do what the Christie government does, which is give all of the big shots a free pass by enabling them not to pay their bills, so that you have no other choice. I'm saying you hold everybody accountable, including the big shots who get to escape paying their taxes, while the poor man who has no choice but to pay on the fruit and the vegetable and everything else, because they don't have a choice. Meanwhile, the big shots up at the top get to escape. Well, you don't do that. If they pay, the burdens you have to impose on the poor are reduced.
Well, who are these big shots? Who are these big shots that are not paying?
Let's start.
Because we hear this in the opposition, and we just wonder. $500-700 million in real property taxes unpaid, starting with the lead spokesman for the implementation on value-added tax, not paying the chairman of the Bahamas Electricity Corporation, not paying his taxes. At the same time, he is saying to the Bahamian people, please pay your taxes to keep the country afloat. Please go on and on, but that's not the part I want to litigate. I want to get to this idea that the Christie government, who came to office complaining about the level of debt, and what they did within the first 2 years, borrow almost $2 billion, something like that. In the first what?
In the first year.
Of what?
So over $1 billion in the first 2 years of their term. Their answer to the F&M's borrowing was to double down on borrowing.
How is that fair when you would have left $500 million as a deficit for a new government? So they had to immediately borrow, Mr. Cash.
No, why couldn't
Mr. Cash, you talk about electricity being off in many homes. One of the biggest culprits in this electricity dilemma is successive Bahamian governments. Successive Bahamian governments.
Really?
Yes. I heard Mr. Leslie Miller say on Thursday, right, that BEC owed something like $200 million, and it needed $40 million or so in order to pay his debts, right? And he said that the biggest culprit was the government. The biggest culprit is the government.
The government
owes BEC more than anybody else.
Okay.
And you talk about big shots, right? Should we turn off all the lights in all the government ministries? Turn off all the electricity? Would that be responsible?
And the government was really supposed to pay BEC under the law for street lighting.
Yes.
And that is not done.
But that was done. Those kinds of things were done by the Free National Movement in just before the 2002 elections. Sometime before the either 2002 or 2012 election. May have been 2012 when, in order to relieve some of the burdens off of BEC, the government assumed responsibility for street lighting. This came about around the same time.
But let me make another point here. Let me make another point here. Let me make another point here.
No, but
let me make this point. Let me make this point. One of the reasons the Bahamian economy has done so well over the years is due to its ability to attract foreign investment.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
Mm-hmm.
We strayed from that model when we allowed the Bama project to come to this country and to bring 8,000 Haitians, 8,000 Chinese in to work. What that did was Bahamians, the man in the street, the fellow who you want to help, did not feel the impact of that $3.5 billion. And I say to you, Mr. Cash, that is one of the fundamental reasons why the Bahamian Bahamian economy is in the doldrums. And that happened on the F&M watch.
If the Christie administration that came into office in 2012 thought that that was such a dastard deal, they had the authority to change it. The fact of the matter is...
No, you couldn't change it. One of the things that responsible governments do, right? One of the things that governments stand on the shoulders of other governments. You cannot arrogate an agreement made by a previous government because you don't like it.
Well, I was giving you the courtesy of accepting your premise, which I, in fact, do not agree with, because the reality is
I tell you what.
$400 million, I believe.
I tell you what.
From $200 million that the Christie government was negotiating, the F&M came in and got it doubled to $400 million would have been the piece that Bahamians would have had access to under the Bahama deal.
You ask the average Bahamian if he or she has felt the impact of that $3.5 billion project.
Well, you know, that's a legitimate question. That is a legitimate question. But it's been 2 years now since the Christie regime was in office. The question that ought to be asked is, why is this project not coming in on schedule? Why has the laws...
That's not a government business. That's not a government business. That's a private project. That's not a government business.
Oh, really? Okay.
Bahama is a private project, so
that's not a government project.
Well, that has to do with the government.
No, the question is, if the government is determined to ensure that there is a creation of jobs within this economy, if the government wants to take credit for the 8,000 plus jobs that were created, and government itself didn't create all of those jobs, at the same time, it has to assume responsibility also for the extent to which the economy was not able to create the jobs that were necessary.
That's upside down. That's upside down logic.
Okay, if you say so.
Okay, let's take this break here on the program. It's an interesting discussion with Mr. Darron Cash, the able chairman of the Free National Movement. We'll come right back.